Hello, everybody. You are at a meeting of the Board of Education. Today is June the 9th, 2020. It is now 5:35 p.m. And as many of you know, last board meeting, we began our meeting with 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence as a form of reverence and a thoughtful opportunity to consider not only the loss, but what we as individuals and as community might do to improve the challenges that our nation currently faces, and to be quite honest, has faced for many, many, many years. And so, unless there's some objection by my colleagues, it seems appropriate that we once again dedicate our moment of reverence, which is part of our agenda, and the 8 minutes and 46 seconds to this thoughtful period of time. And so we will do that. So I encourage my colleagues, and as they have encouraged me and the rest of this community, to consider what we might do differently to make our city, our state, and our country different tomorrow. Okay. Hope everybody has had the opportunity to once again contemplate not only, of course, what this nation is going through, but also, more importantly, what George Floyd must have been going through. 8 hours and 8 minutes and 46 seconds feels like a long time to us. We're trying to take care of the people's business, but I cannot even imagine. I don't even think anybody could imagine how that 8 minutes and 46 seconds felt to Mr. Floyd. So, but continue on, we must, and we have to use our time very valuably as we seek to perhaps even prevent some of this stuff from happening from other folks by having good schools and good leaders come out of our schools. So with that having been said, I think the next item on the agenda is our speakers list. Madam Clerk, I think we have one speaker, is that right?
Yes, Mr. President, our speaker this evening is Kristen French. Kristen, welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Just finding my notes. Hello, good evening. I wanted to bring up Resolution 954 that was voted on last week, which indicated the appointment of our new fiscal monitor, Dr. Shelley Jallow. A vague statement on the responsibilities of the position and the wages of the position. During the board meeting, I eagerly awaited the clarifying questions and comments of commissioners to help the public better understand Dr. Jallow's role in our district, as well as how the current budget already put forth in front of the City Council was going to provide the wages for this position, but commissioners were almost silent. Based on the resolution, Dr. Jallow would receive $154.27 per hour in addition to the $1,200 per month for living expenses. It's unclear if what was included in the wages were funds for extra expenses such as meals and travel, or this was additional to what was presented. Based on the information, a basic 40-hour work week brings that total wages for the position to be a minimum of $322,940 per year. With this pay being one of the highest I think I've ever seen in RCSD ever, I was surprised not to hear more questions and comments from the commissioners to help their constituents better understand the reasoning and process for arriving at the $322,940. After much research, I learned that $175,000 of the funds were provided by the state towards a fiscal monitor, and so the public is left to assume that the remainder of the wages and allowances are covered by the district. Were the funds in the 2021 budget set aside for the extra expense in the wages of this position expected to be covered in full by the district for future years? The Part C of Chapter 56 indicates that reasonable and necessary expenses incurred by the monitor while performing their official duties will be covered by the district. But this does not include compensations as the resolution suggests. Therefore, for the sake of transparency and stake building with the RCSD community, especially during a funding crisis and extreme budget deficit, I'm suggesting more specific details to be provided to the public in writing in the role of Dr. Jallow will have for our district and how this position is being funded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. French. Mr. President, that ends our speakers for this evening.
Ms. French, I would tell you and everybody listening that within short order, we're going to release a series of dates that describe public hearings that will describe not only the role of the independent monitor, but how she will relate to district affairs such as financing and so forth. So, and I hope at that time there'll be greater clarity with respect to the numbers that you've provided. I'm not in the position to argue one way or another, but I suspect that the $322,000 figure is wrong. But there should be time to accurately vet that and have some details about that. So quite literally today, I received some emails from staff working diligently with Dr. Jallow on coming up with dates for a public hearing. And in fact, I think we settled on 3 dates. So all that detail that you reasonably request will be made available in short order as part of those public hearings. So thank you for the inquiry.
Thank you.
Yep. Next item on the agenda is special meeting discussion items, resolutions under consideration. Madam Clerk, what do we got there?
President White, you have for consideration Resolution 974, which is specific to teacher support for students completing online credit recovery and virtual courses required for graduation.
Madam Superintendent, do you want to, before I put up that, well, let me first get it on the floor for discussion. Is there a motion to advance for discussion Resolution 974?
Motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Thank you for the second, Commissioner Powell. Before we entertain questions, if there are any, Madam Superintendent, are you there just to provide some context for Resolution 974?
I'm gonna defer my comments right now to Glenn Vanderwater, who can answer.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. This resolution is in response to the shortening of the school year. Traditionally, every year we have anywhere from 20 to 30 students still trying to wrap up online credit recovery courses. We didn't put a resolution forward earlier because we weren't made aware of the shortening of the school year until just about a week ago, and was advised through legal not to do a walk-on resolution, but to do one that would provide the board an opportunity to read the resolution.
Any questions or comments for the superintendent or Mr. Vanderwater? Let me just check.
President White,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner LeBron has her hand up.
Yep. I was just getting ready to pull up that screen. Yes, Commissioner LeBron?
It was actually from the beginning, so when I take over as finance chair, I'll make my statements then. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions to the superintendent regarding Resolution 794? I got my screen up now. I can see if anybody's raising their hand. Doesn't appear that there are any questions, so let's go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of Resolution 974 indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Please
Aye.
make sure your screen is on. All right, and any of those board members opposing Resolution 974 indicate by saying nay or no. All right, seems that the ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is the Finance Committee. So Commissioner LeBron, I tender the gavel over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted I want to go back to the beginning of the meeting where we paused for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and you asked folks to have some reflections that one of the demands of our local Black Lives Matter movement is the removal of the SROs in our CSD. In fact, it's like their second demand out of the list, which this board has the body and the power to do so. We don't need to wait for City Council to have that conversation again or bring it back up as a resolution. And I would implore all of you to reconsider some of your stances on the SROs, especially if you're serious about what's happening in this country and wanting to change the trajectory, especially for Black and Brown students in this district. So with that, I am going to turn the meeting actually over to Bob because the first thing on the agenda item is the finance portion of this. So Bob, take it away.
Thank you.
The minutes, can we do a motion regarding the minutes really quickly?
Yeah, we could do a motion now. Can I get a motion to pass the minutes from the last finance meeting?
Motion.
Do I need a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 You got that, Marisol? Okay, thank you, Kalia.
Thank you.
All right, Bob, you're up.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Kalia, I probably will ask you to flip back and forth again between the cover memo to the packet and then the actual reports. But we'll start with the cover memo. I'm just going to push this out of my way. Different screen. Okay, starting with our cash balance and general ledger summary. Commissioners, again, I'm reporting both the general fund and all funds in this memo. And I'll focus on the general fund for this discussion. Our beginning cash balance, beginning of May, was just over $131,491,000. We've had cash receipts and net transfers in, net of transfers out, $119, almost $466,000. And then cash disbursements within the general fund of just over $142,562,000. That leaves a ending cash balance within our general fund of $108,394,571, which again is a rather healthy balance given the rocky past 12 months the district has experienced. Couple words of caution, and I'm going to go into those words of caution as we look at the cash flow projection on page 2. The cash flow projection as of May 31st of 2020, we are now projecting to end the school year with an available cash balance of $109,442,252. And that is a good amount. And I note that on the surface, it appears to be a remarkable improvement from what we've reported in the prior months, but it comes with a caveat. And I need to note that we've only allowed payment to our transportation vendors for services prior to our COVID-19 closures. It's been discussed a number of times with the board, and the board is evaluating whether perhaps a discounted payment to our vendors should be made, if any payment is going to be allowed at all. And we are awaiting SED assurance that if we do make payment during this closure period, our payments will be reimbursed at the standard 90% of all our transportation expenses. So the fact that we haven't been making transportation payments and certainly quite a number of contracts, our attorney, Steve Carling, has addressed the board on a larger project, reviewing all our contracts to see what could be pushed off, what payments are we no longer obligated to make. But if we were to make full payment to specifically our transportation, that's going to consume almost $22 million of this projected $109 million balance. So you really have to take that projection with a grain of salt. And if this board decides to make payment, you may decide to make that payment come July. So all these are quickly becoming a mere matter of timing when it comes to our year-end position. If we look at our revenue summary, that will be pages 3 and 4 in this packet. At this time, in total, our projected revenues slightly below our currently amended budget. In total, about $900,000. Looking at our general fund, we have a negative variance, projected revenues coming in under budget by about $2.4 million. And with our special aid and grants fund, we have projected revenues running about $1.5 million over our currently adopted budget. Now, that negative variance in the general fund between the budgeted and projected revenues grew from last month. When we had this meeting last month, we were looking at about a $1.5 million negative variance, and now it's negative $2.4 million. So 2 major changes are reflected in the statements this month. A little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news. The first is that we recognized $2.4 million in additional building aid. We talked about this last month, and Talia, you have on the screen building aid. The budget currently stands at $75,275,888. So when we talked last month, I had mentioned that we were filing and estimating additional cost reports for projects. So our budget, our projection would be going up $2.8 million. It actually only went up 2.4. So even though against a budget of $75.27 million, we're projecting more, just not as much as we thought last month. So now we're projecting $76.366 million. And now on the downside, the other significant adjustment this month is a $3.5 million reduction in capitalized interest revenue from the Joint Schools Construction Board. Kalia, if you just flip to the second page of this report, we'll point out that line right there at the very last one. You got it, Kalia. The budget is currently standing at $5.8 million in revenue, but we are projecting only $2.358 million. That is not what we were projecting last month. And I'm going to suggest that this board really needs to pay attention to that number. These revenue dollars really relate to premium paid on prior bond issuance. So at the time the Joint Schools Construction Board issues bonds, it has to make a decision on what they're going to use the premium for. Now, in this economic climate, and actually for the past probably more than 10 years, investors pay more than the par value of the bonds being issued. So they pay a premium. And at the time the bonds are issued, we have to decide, what are we going to use that premium for? And you really get, there's bond issuance costs, there's bond counsel, there's the printing of the official statement. But in the end, you got two choices: capitalized interest or additional construction costs. These bonds have always been issued assuming premium would be used for capitalized interest. So what does that mean? That means, in short, you use that money for future debt service. The school district pays the debt service on these bonds. So if the premium is going to be used for capitalized interest, it should be transferred to the district, and we should deposit it in our debt service fund and use it for the upcoming bond payment. We are, however, being told that the Joint Schools Construction Board needs that money for additional construction costs. Now that's valid, but I don't know if that was the determination at the time the bonds were issued. There is a tax certificate that gets filed with the IRS. Now, we don't pay income taxes, but there's still a requirement to file tax certificates. And I really urge this board to ask questions about that, because that's a significant amount of money to this district. And $3.5 million is a lot of money to any organization. But for an organization such as ours that has made so many difficult financial and budgetary choices in the past 11 months, 8 months, you need to pay attention to this. Other than that, there are no significant other major changes really to note on the revenue summary. So I'll go to the next report.
Bob, are you taking questions as you go, or do you want?
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner. You're always welcome to jump in.
Okay, I have two questions before you move on to the next set of reports. On this point you just made, how much decision-making authority do we have given that, given the existence of the Joint Construction Board? Are these, you told us to pay attention to it, but how much authority do we have over whether that decision to reverse course and not capitalize it and use it for construction costs instead? How much authority do we even have, given that the construction board makes most of those decisions?
So thank you. That's an excellent question. I think this board needs to ask questions about this. When it comes to authority, the Joint School Construction Board did not vote on a resolution to transfer these dollars to the district, and they feel that such action would be required for them to do that. However, I do believe you need to ask questions about how the bonds were sold and what was the original intent for the bond premium. Like I said, historically, it has always been used for capitalized interest, and everyone I've talked to here in the school district had no reason to believe it would be different this year. When it comes to the authority, this board has limited authority, but I will say the district is charged with appointing, I believe, 3 of the board members over at the Joint Schools Construction Board. I believe it's a 7-member board, 3 appointed by the mayor, 3 appointed either by our superintendent or this Board of Education. And I believe then there's a joint appointment.
It's by the superintendent, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. I wasn't sure about that. Right now, I am only aware of Mike Schmidt, who sits on the board. Mike is our operations director and certainly knows everything there is to know about these construction projects in terms of the buildings and what is needed. I would suggest that perhaps you have a discussion with the next CFO and decide if that would be an appropriate appointment to this board, and find another board member from the district who could help you as a Board of Education look out for the financial interests of this district.
Thank you.
So it's not a lot of authority, but you have influence.
Yeah, let me just interject here. What the president
You
said.
guys also use the hand thing because Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
But
hold
go
on.
ahead, continue, Commissioner Elliott.
No, hold on. Commissioner LeBron, you are correct. Vice President Elliott, would you mind if we just go ahead and follow the order?
Well, it had to do with what you had just said, so I don't know if Commissioner Shepard and I thought Beatrice was running the meeting.
I am. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, you know, Beatrice,
You can continue.
Beatrice,
Yeah.
I am sorry. You are absolutely
okay.
right. I should keep my
Continue,
nose out of it.
Commissioner Elliott, and
Vice
then
President, you're right.
I'll let you go next. I
Yeah,
see.
I just wanted to correct what the
My bad.
president. Can you hear me? I just wanted to correct what the president said. That seventh person is a joint decision by the superintendent and the mayor. If it was only the superintendent, then we would have control over that board, which we don't. And if you recall, even with the fourth person who is supposed to be that seventh person, that is I can't think of her name now. She really is an appointment by the mayor. And so I just wanted to clarify that really is a an appointment that's made jointly, not by the superintendent. And if you were, I won't get into some of the other stuff because there was some bullying going on as to why we were Gina Cruz is on there. So I'll just leave it at that. But I just wanted to correct that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I keep hearing that this board should ask questions around that. But I am not comfortable waiting until a new CFO comes in and has to learn some of these things. The questions that I would have around that, though, which I want to pose now, and I don't know if this goes to legal or if this is something that we talk about in executive session, but the change and when it occurred, and who ultimately came up with that. And I do want to know what the original agreement was, because to change it from now, after we have voted on a budget, thinking we're going to get this amount, and then it changes and we just hear about it here in this meeting, is frustrating for me, because we make decisions based on that amount of money. And so if it's not legally permissible, that's something that I would be expecting from the superintendent and her team to let us know. And then, okay, those were my two questions around that. I can wait until we're done. I did want to go back. I wasn't sure if you were going through your whole presentation or waiting. So I'll wait until you're done because I have something on another topic. But I do want those questions out, and I do think that that is the monitoring that happens at the superintendent's level, that we get alerted about that. And I would like answers before the next CFO comes in.
I know people are tired of hearing me say, well, at the county. But I just had to tell you, you've all been in this town for a while, and you all know the news articles around local development corporations. So I just treat these entities and these situations gently, and I just think when it comes to third-party organizations, just got to keep your eye on that ball.
Yeah, I also want to add, in particular to this topic, that the board should actually be requesting the tax certificates and the details of the expenditures. And we have every right to do so as a board. to ask for those details with those particular documents. So I will welcome Commissioner Shepard's questions. If we can get board staff to start typing these up, I'll send these, but we need to see the actual records of what was submitted for expenditures and their tax certificates and their bond documents so that we understand where the money went to and is going to. I don't want to just submit questions. I need evidence of what they answer. I see Willa Powell's hands up, and then President White, I think you're after Willa, but I don't know if her hand is up from before.
No, well, let me put it this way. I started my remarks saying I had two questions, but if President White has a question on this topic, I will defer to him.
Okay.
Because that's my other question is on what we already covered.
Okay.
No, it actually was more in the line of an apology and a clarification. Apologies to you, Commissioner LeBron. I old habits die very hard. I thought I was calling out the question, so my apologies. But I did want to clarify, when Bob brought up that subject of who appoints, he wasn't sure who appoints what. I was referring to the three, Vice President Elliott. I wasn't referring to the one in the middle, who you are absolutely correct. That once again is done by the superintendent and the mayor, and they pick together. So I was just thinking of, he was referring to those three. Those were the mayor's picks, the superintendent's picks. Sorry, but I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah, and just for clarity, because we've had this conversation before, it's always good to bring it back out there since both Commissioner Elliott and President White have brought it up, that the three were appointed during a time when this board had an interim. So I just want to point that out there, that it may be time, now that we have a permanent superintendent that is going to be staying with us, and I can say that for sure, that we re-examine that and make sure that the people that are selected to represent us on that board are really representing the best interests of the district.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Shepard?
Yeah, I have one final question. I know that City Council still has to vote on this budget, and I wanted to know what numbers or what changes are going to be made surrounding this, and if the conversation will be had before they vote this week.
Bob, I think that's a question for you.
I'm just grabbing my budget book. We have a line for this particular revenue stream, and we actually reduced it for the fiscal year 21 budget. Within the general fund, we did not budget anything. We did, however, include in our capital improvement plan notations. I'm sorry, not our debt service, not our capital improvement, our debt service plan. An expectation of 2.16 million in capitalized interest.
Would that be would that 2 million be from the 1920 budget that you've been describing in this month's financial statements, or
Commissioner, that would be associated with the upcoming debt issuance of the construction board.
So
I think that happened already last week or a week and a half ago.
I guess Commissioner Shepard's question, was your question answered, Commissioner Shepard?
I'm not sure. I'm actually opening up my stuff right now to verify. So we can move on. I may have to ask it through the question log because I'm trying to look at the numbers and compare to what Bob said.
Okay. Commissioner, all right. Thank you. Commissioner Powell and then Commissioner Elliott.
Are we all done talking about the capitalized interest?
I don't know what the other commissioners' questions are. but your hand is up before Commissioner.
Okay.
So I'm calling by order.
Okay, at the risk of, okay, so my question, if Kalia could put up the financial statements, the bottom of the narrative cover letter or the top of page 2. Bob, the tables show a decrease in revenues, but the narrative said something about surplus. So can you explain the difference? It says, right, at this time, projected revenues are slightly higher.
Oh, good Lord.
Okay, so
Yep, that's what it says.
so I'm not
Not what it means.
okay. So when it comes time to approving the statement, can you give us some corrected language?
Absolutely, Commissioner. Absolutely.
All right. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Elliott?
Callie, if you could leave that up. Bob, these are the financials that we normally do not get in June. And so, but we should have gotten them that would have alerted us that there was an issue in the finances. So on this particular statement or on the financials themselves, point out where we should have been looking to determine to that would have told us that we had a significant deficit. Is it right here and on the financials themselves? Can you point that out?
Yep, right here. This would be this table and the table below in Part D would be two good tables to compare. The table at the top that's on the screen right now shows that, and I'm just going to pick the general fund if you don't mind. The general fund, it looks like revenues are coming in under budget by $2.4 million in change. So how are you going to accommodate not collecting $2.4 million? One way to accommodate that, you can look further down this page in section D, which is appropriations by major account. For the general fund, I'm just going to skip to the bottom, available appropriations, 116 million. So the question needs to be posed is, have you squirreled away or reserved or otherwise blocked spending of at least 2.4 million of this available 116,026? Because if you don't spend all your available appropriations, if you underspend by at least 2.4 million, you're going to be covered in the general fund. And the general fund will be fine. If the district believes it's going to spend every penny, then you're going to incur a $2.4 million loss in the general fund. So the questions for this board to ask me would be, how are you accommodating this loss of revenue? And I would tell you, because that is the appropriate question for this set of financial statements, we are working to squirrel away and not spend all of these available appropriations.
On the financials, on the expenditure side, how do we detect on the expenditure side the deficit and compare that to what was projected? That may be a real simple question that I'm asking, but I'm also asking it so that the public is aware about how we are to look at these financials.
Okay.
And just to remind the public that we had not been receiving the June financial statements. We were told, that they were closing the books up, and that would take time and what have you. So if you could just respond to that question.
I will, Commissioner, thank you. And, the team here, they really are working hard to close the books in the month of July, and it I don't necessarily blame them for not wanting to produce June statements. Having said that, this district and this board has been burned before, and I don't know how many of them are listening, so close your ears if you are listening, but I would suggest that maybe you ought to ask this team to produce a set of June financial statements for your review. You got to take that with a grain of salt, because I need to tell you, if you do have the team produce June reports, you just need to know that they're not going to look just like the CAFR is going to look. They're not going to have all of the required GAAP adjustments, the generally accepted accounting principles adjustments that we have to make, making sure that all liabilities are accrued. The vacation accrual is settled. The post-employment benefits liability is settled. So take them with a grain of salt. They're more shown to you, I'll say, on a budget basis, not a GAAP financial statement basis. So the numbers will look a little different, but I think for your purposes, having a set of June statements would help you. And it's okay that they're not going to look just like the CAFR is going to look, because there's a lot of accounting adjustments that have to be made that are not really applicable to a budget, an encumbrance system, and fund accounting system set of internal statements. So having said that, to really answer your question, Commissioner, I guess I would suggest that you need to turn to Report D, the appropriations by major account. And kind of like we, actually, Kalia, would you mind flipping over to like pages 5? It's the first page of the appropriations by major. Yeah, this page here. So like as of the end of May, within the salary compensation, you have available funds of available appropriations of $39.3 million. Are we going to spend every penny of that? And the answer is likely no. And you will be able to see that in June. What will the number be on these June statements? It better be more than 0. Last month, we talked about focusing in on those last 2 columns, the percent of appropriations used and the percent of appropriations that are available. We are tracking on a pretty good, we're tracking a pretty good rate. You know, if the percent used was 95%, I think we would have a real problem. But generally speaking, you're not going to spend the remaining 15% in 1 month, especially given that the month of June is truncated. You know, we're out of school that last week. Same with the next section. We talk a lot about substitute teacher costs, hourly teachers. You have available appropriations, $1.5 million for substitutes. You have $4.5 million hourly teachers. Hourly teachers, most of these dollars are those board resolutions, your additional pays. But we haven't been in front of students. We're not providing a lot of direct service, so those payments are trending downward. And this district is not going to spend $4,548,000 of hourly teacher appropriations in the month of June. So this is all of these lines assessing how much of the available appropriations will actually be spent in June, and then following up with the set of June reports, seeing how you actually ended. That gives you a sense of how the district is accommodating that $2.4 million loss of general fund revenue. I see at the bottom of this page, contract transportation. This is that the $22 million I was concerned about. If this board decides in the end that yeah, you're gonna go ahead and make full payment, you'll consume 22 million of that projected year-end cash balance. That 22 million kind of shows up in this committed column. It's the column right smack dab in the middle of the report. It's 23,163. Was it 867? 887.
87.
We've encumbered our transportation vendor contracts. So that encumbrance is sitting in that 23 million. So if you were to approve full payment, that 23.163 million would be reduced by 22 million. The next number, the actual expenditures, 44,129, that would go up 22 million, but you're not going to change the available balance, 2,032,000. Because those contracts are already encumbered. So you still have a little bit of available transportation appropriations. Again, available appropriations at the end of June show how you're covering that projected reduced revenue. Does that give a flavor of where the question was coming from, Commissioner Elliott?
It does. It does. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Shelley Jallo has a question, and then Commissioner Shepard.
I'm so official. Good evening, everyone. I have the question here. I'm looking at this particular document in the one before with 109 million cash available, cash fund.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it looks good today, but we had COVID. If you didn't have COVID, what would it look like? You know, this is an anomaly. You know, I hate to say it that way, but fiscally an anomaly. So even on the other sheet where you say you have money left over, what's the impact of COVID?
Yes, excellent questions. And thank you for asking that. It does kind of remind me,
Can I just jump in? Because the one document where you said you have 13% left, is that 13%? That's not a good percentage given the fact that you had COVID. It's not a good percentage. Am I saying it? Do you understand what I mean? You know, you shouldn't have so.
Depends on the budget line.
Mm-hmm.
The district made a concerted decision consistent with its collective bargaining agreements to continue paying teachers because we are expected to continue providing educational services to our students. So we were paying teachers. The civil service, we were all, I mean, I was still working, the staff was working, most of the staff are working from home. But for all intents and purposes, all the staff, not 100%, but all the staff of the district were still being paid during our COVID closures. Actually, I don't think there were any exceptions. I think all the staff continue to get paid.
Yeah, they did.
Everybody got paid.
Only substitute teachers would have been dramatically reduced.
Thank you. Yes.
Right.
And also, I don't think the substitutes, the long-term subs, my understanding where they were still getting paid, not the one a day subs.
Long-term subs did continue receiving payments, but you're correct. The day-to-day, they got paid the day before and the day after our closure, according to their contract. But that's it. Speaking of the COVID closures, I did comment at our preview meeting. I will say on the cash flow report, and Kaya, I'm sorry to ask you to do this, but will you scroll back up to the cash flow projection?
So Bob, before you go into that subject, because you just brought up previews,
yep.
I do want to just bring this up because we did discuss this in the previews. that the board has not decided to pay, whether they're going to pay transportation contracts or not yet. But part of that is also being driven that we don't know if we're going to get reimbursed if we pay them. And we're kind of waiting on the state to give us an answer.
Really important.
That way the board can then have the correct information on how to proceed. However, one of the things that came up is that either way, whether this board decides not to pay those transportation contracts, let's say the state comes back and says they're not going to reimburse us if we pay, and we decide as a board not to pay them, then what will happen is we will have these additional revenues that are in our budget. I don't even want to use the word revenues, even or surpluses. It sounds positive, but we're so in a big negative right now. But what we discussed was, what can the board do to ensure that the district is putting that money to the side so that we know that next year we're going to be fiscally impacted by transportation. And one of the things that you suggested is that the board can pass a resolution specifically to outline that we create an assigned fund balance for transportation for this funds. And that is something that I do want the board to consider through resolution. And I don't know if you want to speak more on that and if I'm missing any information to that piece of it.
Certainly, Commissioner. What you were driving at is, if we do not pay our transportation vendors, the expense on our books is lower, but we still have the state's transportation aid at the same dollar amount. So to the Commissioner's point, when it comes to transportation, it looks like you're deriving a surplus. But because we have lower expenses this year, you're going to have reduced state aid next year. But if school is open and you're busing all of our students, your expenses are going to be very high. So now you're in the opposite situation, right? We have high expenses, but reduced revenue. So what Commissioner Brown was saying is, commit a portion of fund balance this year to offset the loss you're going to incur in transportation next year.
Thank you. And I don't know if you're going to another topic, but Commissioner Shepard has her hand up and Commissioner Powell, but Dr. Shelley, are you?
I did want to address Dr. Bell's question.
Okay.
You definitely on this cash flow report see an impact of our COVID-19 closure. Alia, could you please highlight that cash disbursement? It's in the May column towards the middle in the bottom section. It's actually 18,277,739. Yes, that number right there. That is our accounts payable disbursements in the month of May. Last month, when we looked at this projection, that accounts payable cash disbursement was projected to be 31.3 million, but yet it's only really 18.277 million. So that really highlights a financial impact, at least a cash impact on our COVID-19 closure. Now, some of that is because we're not paying our transportation vendors. Some of that is because we've done a review of district contracts and determined that a number of those contracts we're no longer receiving services, so we're not going to make payment anymore. But combined, to actually have vendor payments of 18.2 million when we were projecting over 31 million certainly highlights this closure's impact. So I guess the takeaway on that comment is, come to this meeting with 2 or 3 months worth of financial reports in front of you, or look at them the night before and ask questions about, geez, you said it was going to be 5, but it's really 10. What happened? And we'll either answer the question or we'll say, oh my God, that's a good question. We'll have to look into that and respond in writing.
Commissioner Shepard?
Yeah, so this is along the same lines, and I guess I will frame my question. I did have a question in regards to SED, the assurance, if we know when we can expect an answer from them in regards to covering that money, because I do want to respond to Dr. Jallo, highlighting the impact of COVID makes our stance at this point look like an anomaly, but we still have 22 million that's hanging in the wind. And it'll only be an anomaly if the state will cover that through COVID. If they don't, then that money goes right back into our expenditures, which we then have to find, and it no longer makes it an anomaly. And so I do want to know if SED, if there's a timeline on when SED would be giving the assurance, and if that money comes straight to the district or if it goes through the city. Because I am concerned about the timing of it. So I always look at cash flow. So I'm concerned if it goes through the city, then what does that look like in regards to timing and us getting it in our budget?
Well, in that regard, fortunately, it does not go through the city. It would come directly to the district. But that's only a glimmer of hope for you, because the broader answer, or the broader question you're asking is, what is the timeline from SED? And I'm sorry to say, I don't have a timeline. I know internally their attorneys were debating back and forth whether this really should be reimbursable or not. So I'm not sure they had come to a conclusion. I have reached out. I believe Mike Schmidt has also reached out. It's just to your point, I think everyone's in agreement. This question needs an answer in very short order.
Commissioner Powell?
Yes, thank you. So on the question of whether we should act by resolution on a restricted fund, I know that we have some examples of resolutions creating restricted funds from when the GASB rules changes went into effect around special funds. I would think that we could create a restricted fund with those $22 million now, such that if the guidance from the state set is you need to pay it, at least we can pay it out of that restricted fund. If the guidance is don't pay it, we hold those $22 million specifically for transportation funding for 2021. It's a little more complicated a resolution than any template we have, but I would think that we should, if my colleagues think that that's a good idea to act by resolution, there are templates out there on restricted funds, establishing restricted funds that we can turn to, correct?
Yes, Commissioner. And just for clarity, today's buzzword is commit. So the board would pass a resolution to commit whatever, $22 million for the subsequent payment of transportation expenses. When the board passes a resolution to commit fund balance for a future purpose, it will take a board resolution to actually spend those committed dollars. Just to be clear on that.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would support us moving forward by the next board business meeting to have a resolution with that language. I can reach out to Bob and legal, but I think this is Bob's last finance official meeting. So, but at least it's being recorded, and I believe legal is on this call.
And this is well versed in this as well.
Yeah, so we could draft something and send it out to the board before the next board business meeting. So if anybody has any objections to us drafting something and sending it out to you guys before the next board business meeting, this would be the time to bring it up before staff moves forward. If I don't see no objections, then that's what we'll work on. Okay. Thank you for that. And I don't know if you were done, right? You were not done.
Only Commissioner, only because negative numbers get asked about. I do want to point out one negative number. Kai, if you could scroll down, I think it's the second page, the appropriations, right there, right? One page up. You got it. I see a red number, negative 116,569. That's in computer hardware instructional. I did want to point that out because you always should ask questions about negative numbers, negative available funds. $40,000 of this negative 116, 40 grand is directly related to our COVID-19 response. The remaining dollars are also instructional related, but it's our deployment of our development of additional instructional materials and our online capability to deliver online educational resources. So a couple things about that. 40 grand is specifically COVID-19 related. We do have, as a district, an approved request for public assistance with FEMA. So this could be FEMA reimbursed, could we submit that claim. The caveat there is it's FEMA reimburses 75% of the expenses. So we're gonna have a 25% local share. I'll also point out that, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but what the heck, Monroe County received $129 million in CARES Act funding for COVID mitigation and response. They do have the ability to allocate some of those dollars to school districts and other municipalities. We are on the list. There's a long line of school districts and municipalities with their handout, don't get me wrong. But I did say, hey, we got expenses, put us on the list. They did. So that could be all or partially reimbursed. But I will also say in the end, computer hardware, instructional computer hardware drives revenue next year. Part of our state aid is for computer hardware. So $1 we spend today drives $1 in revenue next year. So even though we're slightly overspent this year, we'll have a benefit next year in the revenue side. This particular line went negative. Ordinarily, people always think specific budget accounts should not go negative. You shouldn't be able to overdraw your appropriation. But to be clear, there are a number of accounts that are grouped together, and it's at that account grouping where the budgetary control lies. So sub-accounts within that grouping can go negative. They simply draw upon the available resources of the other accounts. So in total, the total grouping cannot go negative as a budgetary control, but some of the sub-accounts within that grouping can. So that was a situation where in our response to COVID needs and our need for online educational delivery, we went ahead and spent these dollars.
All right.
And of course, the other numbers in our rentals, and we've kind of explained this, that's a year-end journal entry that the accounting group will process.
Thank you for explaining that, Bob, especially on record. So are there any further questions about this finance report?
Motion to approve with a correction to the cover letter to read revenues lower than instead of higher than.
Before we accept that motion, Commissioner Shepherd just raised her hand.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to make sure too that moving forward, in the actual memo document that anything that goes into the red should have an explanation in the memo. I would like that to happen, and that would go to Dr. Myers-Small for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I like that suggestion, Commissioner Shepard. Makes sense. And then these are public documents, so if the public pulls them from board docs, they should be able to also read them and follow along and understand, especially when there is a negative. And that one rental is always negative, so we'll see that until it gets corrected at the end of everything. So, okay, so anybody else before we move forward? Okay, so Commissioner Powell.
I'm sorry, I do want to say thank you to Bob for coming in on such short notice, being here for the amount of time that you were here, and really kind of getting a lot of things under control, just jumping in, using your expertise. And I just appreciate all the work that you have done in your time here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Commissioner.
Bob knows I'm going to be harassing him now at the county level, but so he might not see some of yeah, but I will be in touch. All right, Commissioner Powell, do you want to make that motion now with the correction?
So moved.
All those in, do I need a second for that?
Yeah, you do.
I do have one question. I'm so sorry. Commissioner Paul, can you repeat your correction? I wasn't able to gather that for the minutes.
It's a one-word correction, I think. If you turn to page 2 in the narrative, the very top first sentence, I think if you simply change revenues higher to revenues lower.
Yeah.
I think that does the job.
Perfect. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, does somebody want a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, the ayes have it. So thank you, Bob, again. All right, next item on the agenda item is, let me pull my agenda up, is the budget hold'em game as a fiscal training. So I actually first played this game last year with my board fellows in Atlanta. It was part of our training on the budgets, and the educational ERS came out and did the training. And actually they developed the game themselves. But it is an interactive game to learn about budgets and decisions. And I really, really like the game, and it kind of allows everyone to play a different role, from like union leader to superintendent to board member to parent. And then you work in teams and trying to either reduce the budget or make decisions on how to spend within your budget. So I wanted to do it with this board last year, but then a whole bunch of things happened from last year to this year. But I did not want to forget about it, and I wanted to bring it back up because I just played it again with Georgetown. And I do think it is an interactive game that the board can do as a board, but that we can also do with administration and the superintendent and the SEG group and the board, and then the board, SEG's administration, the superintendent, and even our community as we go along. And I would love the opportunity to, in the future, when we can all come back together as one, do this type of training with the community as an exercise in understanding decision-making and the budgets. And they have real life scenarios on these cards too. So Kalia did send the link to everyone, so everyone could have went on the website. And I don't know, Kalia, if you want to pull it up now so folks can see it, but the link does allow you to do like a round to get a flavor for it. So if there are no objections to that, the staff is they're working on a number of dates for board retreats for us in the future. And one of them will include a fiscal training using an interactive training game. Do you want to press start new game? So I can't press it. It's on your screen. So this is the game you guys had, didn't see. So in this one, relative to last year, how much would your overall budget increase or decrease? So you can put like a target on whether your budget is decreasing or increasing and develop the game that way too. In addition, from my fellowship program, I actually may have an opportunity to apply for a trainer to come in to facilitate the training that would be free to the board. So my program would pay for it. I want to throw that out there. Anybody has any questions? I think Kalia put one up. Anybody have any questions or objections to us playing the game? Dr. Jallo.
Right. I'm sorry, you can hear the train.
It's okay.
Background, I'm sorry. So is this, I'm familiar with the game. The game is great. And you can learn a lot from the game. Is this part of an overall PD plan for the board, or is this part of the goals that the board has for professional improvement? Is this something bigger?
Yeah, so the board actually does have a professional development plan. And some of them did include like fiscal training, which one of the things that we did all do back in, I believe, February was the training with NSBA. I think we talked about this a little bit on Friday, which we thought was going to be a little bit more tailored to the district, but it was more like the 8-hour financial training that you have to do as an elected coming on in New York State. So it was kind of very similar to that, although it did include some, I guess, uniqueness to Rochester. But personally, you will find that I believe there's never enough fiscal training for us, which is why I get myself into other. I personally love learning more and more about the budget. I know it's not everyone's forte, so trying to find ways that is a little bit more interactive and fun, but also educational around fiscally responsibility and decision making. Yeah. So yes, there is a PD plan, and I will do. Would you like to get a copy of that plan?
I would. And also, is your recommendation that the board does it alone, or the board does it with administration?
So my recommendation is that the board does it together as a team first, so that we are then, at least have an experience as a team, as a PD for us, but also we are, part of our PD was board retreats as well. So I would like one of this to be the topics in our board retreats. And there'll be other things covered in the board retreat. This is not going to take us all day. Usually we have longer board retreats than PDs. But that after we do it, my hope is that then the board and the administration do it together. That includes Dr. Meyer and her team. Because again, I do think it is a realistic exercise that's engaging on real life decisions that people have to make in a school district budget. And we've actually never have done that. Let me just say that. This board has never had a training with fiscal being the topic overall subject with the SEG group. And then after those two groups do it in the future, and the future could be like next year when we start before we release the new budget. Because this year we did budget trainings for the community. And if you haven't seen it, I'll shoot you the link to that. Bob and myself did it at East. But that after the board does it, the board and the SEG group, then the board SEG group, and that includes the superintendent, we do it with the community, because we have a very invested community in understanding the budget, but it is very comprehensive budget and confusing at times. So that's part of why we started doing workshops this year, to show people how to read the budget, what comes in, what streaming sources are for revenues, and where our expenditures are the heaviest and why.
Thank you.
But I wrote down the PD plan. I'll make sure I talk with the board staff to get that to you and to Dr. Myers. It would be good for both of you to have that. Commissioner Powell and then Commissioner Malloy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think the hand was up from before, but on this topic, I think it's it's embedded in our response to the distinguished educator.
I think it is too, but I think there was an actual plan that we had, but I will have Marisol double check. Thank you,
Okay.
Commissioner Malloy.
So would it be helpful, next week is the governance committee. Would that be helpful then to make this part of the agenda for that meeting?
I think we were actually working, I was going to be working with the staff to do it as a board retreat.
Okay.
First, so that everybody gets a little bit of understanding around the game, but also I do think based on how we are as a board, and I can speak for me, I think it may be best to have someone who is a trainer in the actual game, kind of break us up into teams and groups and facilitate it. And I do think that my program will pay for that, but I won't know. I have a meeting tomorrow with the folks, a Zoom call. So I will let you guys.
Not something that'll happen next week, then if that's not.
I wish, but
Oh,
no.
okay.
I want to make sure that it's paid for by someone else, that I'm not going to be requesting any funds for that. President White?
No, I'm going to put my hand back down. I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. So any questions? Oh, Van, your hand went back up.
Oh, ignore that hand.
Okay. Any additional questions? All right. So that concludes that portion of the budget, and I will get back to you guys. And Commissioner Malloy, I may ask to have a follow-up on your meeting next week on governance, on whether we were able to secure someone.
Fantastic, thank you.
All right, which brings me to the conversation of shifting our budget projections to actuals. So let me preface this and just say, I started school last week at Georgetown. I'm doing a certificate in school finances. And not that everything I learned, I'm gonna try to come back and say, oh, we gotta implement everything I just learned because it's great and wonderful. But one thing that I did take away immediately last week was that the Rochester City School District still budgets on actuals, on projections versus actuals. And that is a practice that other school districts no longer do. And I am tasked with reading like 10 different school districts, including rural and some big cities and smaller cities budgets from now in the next 2 weeks. And so I have that undertaking to kind of understand it a little bit better myself. But one of the things I recall was in 2018 that the administration and the board and the state came in to do a presentation on ESSA and the ESSA report on actuals in schools. And that was the time when they said school districts, and they were implementing it little by little, but Rochester was one of the schools that was going to start it off, was school districts had to create a report on actuals for every school in our district. And that was supposed to also allow us as a board and a body and the state to see how we allocate our funds and whether we are allocating our funds equitably across all of our schools. And if there are some high expenditures at one school, kind of have an understanding as to why, whether it's because there are more special education students there or more multiple language learners there. So I preface that by saying that in 2018, this district already started doing a report that shows actuals on schools. And so it's on our website too, but we are required to submit that to the state every year, that report of all of our schools and all of the actuals. And so I realized that it may be a lift for our finance to kind of change how they produce our budget. It is something I want us to consider as a board in doing, and believe that there are much greater benefits to knowing actuals versus projections. And then I also want to uplift Carlene Pierce, who I see in this call, because Carlene does join us in our finance previews. But she has brought this up before, and I honestly didn't understand it. So I was just like, I'm not even going to touch that subject. but now I get it. And so I want to uplift that she has also been advocating for this for a while. And so I bring it up here because it's the finance meeting. And if you guys want to have conversations about it, this would be the time. Let me just preface this by also saying I have no idea the amount of time, and I don't want to stress our staff out on this, but this is the direction that I believe the district should be going. And so President White, I see your hand up, and Commissioner Powell's up next.
Yes, briefly, I recall Dr. Nelms and Carlene making this point repeatedly, and it was a source of frustration, I think, for them, particularly over the last fiscal year. So I'm glad to hear, and people weren't frankly listening, I think, at certain points, to be quite honest, about their concerns last year. And it not only applies to East, but it applied, they argued, as you had indicated, Commissioner LeBron, Carlene specifically has argued that the district ought to be doing that, and other districts were doing it and we weren't. So it's good to see that folks are now, because I think the folks at East took some heat complaining that people were operating out from projections and not actuals. And so when everybody else wasn't doing that. So this is good to hear. And I like you, Commissioner LeBron, look forward to that. I don't know how heavy of a lift it will be, but I do know if we're going to be working in conjunction with our partners and other districts, competent districts, we have to start doing that. And I think, working with actuals is a better way to understand what your liabilities are and what resources you're working from. And I think part of the problem was because we were working with projections, we could sort of play, not anybody on the board, but people could be kind of loose with the money because you were working with projections. So I think that's what ultimately caught up to us, that people were able to deal with projections and they were able to, money was more fungible that way. So I'm glad to see this, and we are not going to be doing the bulk of the work, the administration is, but I think this is a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell?
I want to echo what was just said. Yes, Carlene did bring this to us as part of sort of the negotiated settlement towards the East DPO's budget versus leading into 2021. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our superintendent at the time was one of the strongest voices against doing actuals for East High, saying essentially that the entire accounting and budgeting system is predicated, and we're using projected, but in fact they are averages. Averages, not so much projections. But I think this is a conversation needs to be driven by the superintendent and the new CFO. And I make that argument or suggestion because there are a lot of other factors come into play. For instance, we have transfer day, right? We have teachers that by a certain deadline are requesting to be transferred to another school. That's going to impact how much that school's payroll allocation would be if teachers who are more senior are moving to a school than what that school is currently made up of. There are a lot of moving parts, and I think that the administration should be studying those moving parts and put together a recommendation for the board rather than the board driving that conversation.
Commissioner Shepard, and then Dr. Myers-Smalls, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, in regards to doing actuals, I know that there are a lot of other factors, and East being just upper and lower, that their scheduling and the things that they do, those factors are a little bit of an easier lift, I'll say it like that, as opposed to the entire district doing actuals would mean that how things are moving towards the end of the year for the next year would be dependent on the superintendent. And so I did want to bounce that in her court to figure out what that actually looks like in regards to adjusting it, because I'm not sure that it would happen overnight. And I know you weren't suggesting that, Commissioner LeBron. And then I also just wanted to point out, because when I heard the term loose with the money, I just want to say I would not ever frame it like that, because I think that again, and we don't have to go into this conversation, I just think that there's a lot of variables when it comes to when cash comes in, when it doesn't, and what people are actually projecting versus what is average. And I think that that is why they keep the gaps the way that they do, because it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand it, but it doesn't make sense why it's been set up this way for so many years. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I don't want anybody to get the wrong interpretation. I don't think President White meant it in that way, but when I hear loose with the money, it's almost like we don't have a hold on what what we're doing with the money. So I just want to make sure that people don't take it that way.
Thank you. Dr. Myers-Small?
Yeah, all I wanted to add is I think this conversation certainly is pertinent, and so I'll definitely have a conversation with the new CFO. But I also know, because of different ways that East versus the rest of Rochester City School District, there was a point of contention of even being able to understand, what the spending was like. So that's something that I just think, as we continue to align, and since East, is a part of the district, that we just need to regularly meet. And I reached out to Dr. Nelms last week for us to start having those conversations. So this is a pertinent conversation, and thank you for bringing it up this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, the conversation about loose money, language I've been told to use around here is under budgeting, over budgeting, change order. That's the language that I know. And I'd be so glad that we can get away from that and have some actual projections on some real stuff, man.
Thank you. I agree. And President White, I'll go to you next. Give me one quick second. I just want to say that the ask of going from actuals to projections or averages, and averages counting towards projections, really is, in my opinion, a board-driven conversation, primarily because our two biggest responsibilities are the budget and policy. In fact, I would say that is partly where this board, unfortunately, has strayed from, and not focused 100% the way it should have been on those two areas, but strongly believe that those are our two roles. In fact, if you look at New York state law and what the board's responsibility are, it lays there too in terms of the budget. And so for me, this is where it should come. But I will also add that, again, that the state requires us through the ESSA report to do actuals already. And that it's been occurring since 2018. It's just never translated over into how we put together a budget and what's presented to us and what we digest. And I'm just saying, at this point in 2020, we should be speaking here as a board and a body with our administration and our superintendent to say it's time to figure out how to marry those two together, so that we are presented with a budget that has actuals and the community has a budget that has actuals. I'm going to go to President White, Commissioner Powell, and Dr. Jallo afterwards.
Yeah, I was just going to add, loose, Commissioner Shepard, what I was referring to, and I can stand by that. I understand the sensitivity to the use of the word, but the reality is we weren't strictly applying, adhering to, I think, sound accounting principles. And I say we, I got to be clear, the board wasn't writing pen and pad and doing in ledgers, but I think the looseness upon which we were saying, okay, well, we're going to project the money here, so it's just a projection, so we can move it over here. That's the context in which I was using the word loosely. And I do think, quite honestly, and if you look at the comptroller's report, that's basically what they're saying was happening. So I just think that, you know, I'm not trying to be critical of the district, but I do think we have to be honest about why. I think on May the 16th, we were told everything was fine and we'd end the year in a sound fiscal position, because I believe people thought that with the looseness of the numbers, they could move stuff around. And eventually, I think without any criminality or anything like that, it caught up with them. That's what I think happened. And I think we have to be honest about that. And I think one of the things that that can prevent that is this notion of, to the extent possible, because I think Commissioner Shepard makes a good point, you know, comparing the district to East is a bit unfair, because East is only one school. So you can imagine it would be easier to use actuals. But there are other districts in this country that are larger than East that are using actual numbers. And you know, East and Carleen, they were pointing that out. So in terms of the married concept that you use, Commissioner LeBron, I do think there is a way. You're absolutely right. One of our responsibilities is to be the fiduciaries or agents of this district. But to Commissioner Powell's point, I think the way you marry this is we should be saying, hey, let's focus on trying as best we can to use actuals. And we say that to our superintendent, and then she, I think this is Commissioner Powell's point on how you marry the two, then she, our superintendent, figures out a way to make that happen. We don't have to have meetings about it until our superintendent comes up with a plan for or a recommendation. Maybe she might say, I don't know, maybe she might say, hey, we can't do actuals. We're gonna have to continue to project it. And she'll explain it. Or she might say, you know what, this is the way in which, or this is the extent to which we can use actuals. I hear what the board is telling me to do. I think it makes sense. Or she might come back and say, this doesn't make any sense. So I think that's the way you marry the two. You're right. We have every right to say, hey, listen, we're the fiduciary agents. And the way it's been working with the projections has not been working for us. Superintendent, you have to do something about it. And we're thinking what you need to do is go actuals. And then she comes up with the plan, or she comes up with the recommendation. So I don't think these two approaches are mutually exclusive. So thank you.
I just want to clarify that when I brought up East as a single school, I brought it up because I said that it's an easier lift in regards to the rest of the district not being able to do it overnight, not for us not to do it at all.
Okay.
That is why I brought that up.
Sure.
Commissioner Powell and then Dr. Jallo.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add because President White pretty much said most of what I wanted to say. I think it, as you, Commissioner LeBron rightly said, it is our fiduciary responsibility. So I think the way we go about it is to direct the superintendent to study and bring back recommendations. Again, I'll say, because we don't know what all the obstacles are to doing the actuals versus averages with regard to FTEs. And part of the reason we got in trouble had to do with the way we managed substitute records. I think that should be part of the conversation too, in terms of how we budget substitute teachers and what controls are around substitute teachers. Although that's also an audit function. But for our listening audience, the difference here is between the ESSA actuals reporting and our budgeting is in fact that the ESSA report is something compiled after the fact, after the close of the fiscal year. And so, you know, again, it goes back to the moving parts that are necessary to be addressed at the budgeting stage. You know, what is the deadline for transfers? When is that solidified? What's our deadline for announcing retirements? You know, for planning purposes, that makes a huge difference in terms of how much a school is going to end up paying out in payroll if they had an older teaching force and folks are lined up for retirement, and you have younger teachers seeking to transfer into them, or vice versa. we only know the tip of the iceberg as to some of those decision-making processes. So what I'm getting out of this conversation so far is that the board is interested in pursuing this, but I again say we really need to throw that ball to the superintendent.
Dr. Jallo.
So I just want to make sure that we remember that this is a requirement. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And actually, that date has passed, right? So my original statement to you at this point was, what exactly is the ask? What exactly is the ask of administration, and when do you want it? Because that helps move, the agenda along. So is it, do you want a plan? Do you want recommendations? What do you want, and when do you want it? So that administration, under the leadership of your superintendent, can make sure that it's produced for you when you want it.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Jallo. So my ask is that the administration go back and look at what the lift would be in terms of timeline, the workload. I know that there's a lot of moving parts right now because of COVID, and we're still under executive orders and in these phases. So if we were not in COVID, my ask would be like, give me the timeline to get this going for next budget year. But I also recognize, because of COVID and everything that's happening, at least giving a projection, like we won't be able to do it this budget year, but we're going to start working towards it for next budget year, the year after that. So yeah, I would like to understand. My ask is, what would be the lift in terms of work? What would be the timeline to have this conversion? And while I understand that there are many factors that play in terms of teacher transferings and new teachers, and that could be a part of the report, and understanding when those things occur for this board to know when something may impact an actual school at a different time in the timeline. And while I know that ESSA reporting happens at the end of the year, I actually want us to go over the ESSA report at the next finance meeting, because I don't recall a time where we have actually gone over that report in finance as a board, to understand this is what's in the budget, but this is what the actuals are. So that's my ask, that, and I, again, have to just say that I wholeheartly believe that the board, when it comes to the finance piece, should be directing administration about it. So personally, I don't want the administration to come back to the board and say we can't do it because of all these factors, because there are other school districts who already do it, and we already do it in a way, but it could be at the end of the year, so be it. So that's my ask, Dr. Jallo.
I just want to add two things. Think about when you want it, and maybe that's mutually agreed upon between the superintendent and you guys. And the other piece I would say is, excuse the train again, I would ask, would it be acceptable to compare schools? Because what you're not speaking about, yes, there's a workload around this. Yes, there's a requirement. But the other issue is it is an obstacle to, as accurate as possible, or as accurately as you can, your projections. If you're doing budgets based on projections, based on averages, and most of your teaching staff are veterans, you already have a gap there in your projections around staffing. So there's an impetus there for you to do this so that your budgeting is more closely aligned to reality, right? If your projections are based on averages and everybody in there has been there 10 or more years, already you're off. So there is another benefit to getting a little more serious about fast forwarding this work. So with that being said, hopefully I want to get us in the habit of dating things that we want and when we want them, so that people can work around that. And maybe it's not decided right this moment, maybe it is, or maybe it's co-created, but I think timelining things is really.
I can support that. And I do have a one-on-one with Dr. Myers this week. She and I have our one-on-one. So we can put that on our agenda as well to discuss as the finance chair and the superintendent. to figure out some of the timelines, and we have some other stuff on our own to discuss. President White?
Yeah, I wanted to suggest, I wanted to make, first of all, make sure there was clarity, and it sounds that I'm right about this, that this is what the board wants to do. That's the first thing that has to be clarified. And then, and I assume, based on the comments I've heard, there are a couple of people haven't spoken up, but assuming that that's what the board wants to do, then what I would do, just to even save time, is I would ask, in terms of Dr. Jallo, your request for a date, you know, it's always important to know where the finish line is. I would just ask Dr. Myers to chime in on this conversation right now, because there's a lot of unknown factors. It could be discussed at another meeting, but I think Dr. Myers probably has a lot of things that are on her plate. And so, as you would expect, Dr. Jallo, we wouldn't, it would be unreasonable if we said, hey, listen, you got until September the 9th to come up with a plan. So I'm thinking, and I think you referred to this, Dr. Jallo, and Commissioner LeBron even suggested this, that maybe there's an offline conversation, or even now, I don't know, Dr. Myers, do you have any thoughts on, given your current commitments, when you could possibly respond to what appears to be a board interest in shifting from projections to an actual budget? Could you comment on that?
I can. I think a couple things need to happen. Obviously, we need to get the CFO acclimated, the new one, right, to Rochester City School District. And then once that happens, making sure that we get our end of year things cleared out and settled. So I think it probably would be fair to say at the end of maybe July, I can come back to the board after talking with him or her to say, here's what the board is asking, and this is a prioritized, identified need from the board. What would be reasonable? And I think that would only be fair.
Dr. Jallo, does that approach make sense to you?
Absolutely. As long as you have, for me, as long as you have an approach that it doesn't just, you know, this is what we want with no, you know, and then another year goes on, or by the time you make the decision, it's too late for you to even think about implementing it for maybe the next year or the following year. So I'm just saying to kind of keep in mind some timelines so that, you know, it doesn't get lost.
Sure. So Marisol and Beatrice, do we have a meeting sometime in the end of July, Dr. Myers, where a finance meeting where this could come back up again and you could give us an update?
We actually will meet again in the beginning of August. So like that first week in August. So
that's fair.
Myers needs till the end of July, then this would be a topic to come back to in the first week of August.
Sure. If that's agreeable to the board, I'm fine with that.
Makes sense to me. I assume by your silence, you know, they say silence is a concession. So everybody else who's not responded.
Commissioner Adams has his hand up.
So right now,
excuse me,
I'm really concerned about us projecting like things is going to be, as if things is going to be going on in September. I just don't know. I think we can't assume anything. So we pretty much going to have to do some projection to start off with, because I don't know if I can let my kids come to school in September. I don't care what the plan is. The safety is still an issue for me. I'm a parent first before I'm a board member. And so I just don't want to say just go out projections all the way because we just don't know.
Okay. So that brings me to my last two parts in the on the agenda, and they kind of are hand in hand. So I put on here to have a conversation around the charter school reconciliation reports. And that was also part of my conversations with the auditor's findings. And I want to project it with that because one of the concerns that the auditors shared for their final report was for us to still look at and monitor charter schools and the tuition and based on the formula. So my understanding is that there was a formula that the district used. There was a slightly different formula that the auditors and the state, they call the state to ensure that they're using the same calculation. But that also brought me to the conversation that charter schools receive funding and then they keep that funding and then they kick out the students and then we have the students, but they've kept the money. And I was corrected and I was very surprised by this. And I even called another commissioner on here to go over this because I have never heard in these last 2 years, that we actually get essentially a bill from charters with enrollment every other month. And we do a reconciliation report and a form, and that's how we pay them out. So they're not getting paid all year long for students if they kick them out midway. What did come up though is that there are some other concerns around them, around beds, codes, days, and a whole bunch of lingo that an average person like myself day to day has no understanding of. But nonetheless, there are concerns there with that. But there is a reconciliation form. So charters do not keep the money all year long, as I hear all the time, and I was corrected by the auditors. But one of the recommendations around that was that those reports, those reconciliation reports, should be audited. Because they're submitting to us their enrollment and we're just assuming that it's correct and on good faith paying. But they did say we should look at potentially, that's an area that those reports should be audited. So I want to put that out there. The other big concern for me that came up was this number of 35 positions, and 35 positions in our budget is kind of what can make or break us in terms of staying on track. And that was a little nerve-wracking for me because I remember in 2018 when we passed that budget, we certainly passed resolutions that were presented from administration for more than 35 positions in the year of 2018 to 2019 that were not budgeted for. So that could go just as quickly. We may end up in a bad situation. So with that said, one of their recommendations to myself as the chair of finance is that one, that human resources and the finance are communicating on a regular basis, but then in part of their communications that they are doing a quarterly review report and submitting it to the board to demonstrate and show how many positions were hired, where did that money come from, was that money budgeted for, did we have the funding, did someone retire and leave and open up that field to then allow another position to be filled, and have a quarterly human resources and finance budget report. And so I wanted to share that here. The other piece was the substitute process, substitute teachers. So Commissioner Powell, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this has come up because this is one of those areas where we cut in the budget, but then we had no controls in place. And sometimes these controls can be driven through board resolutions. So I just want to put that out there because when things go awry, we're going to get blamed. So the substitution process that was even generated this year after the deficit was caught, the previous administration said we're going to put a process in place for schools to reach out to us for a substitute, but that system is not 100%. Still has some loopholes, and schools have found ways around those loopholes. And what ends up happening is at the end of that, the year, we have a much larger bill than we had budgeted for, anticipated. And so I want to make sure that there are some tighter controls around that piece. And I say that to the administration too, and Dr. Myers, because I don't know if you've had a chance to review the new process that was put in place right before COVID and then COVID happened, but I would like a better understanding around controls for substitute teachers and the cost, and also the human resources and finance quarterly budget. And so I want to present that to this board so that you guys understand why this report is being requested and what it should show us.
Okay.
Did you want to say something, Dr. Myers?
No, I just said, okay, that's something that is on my radar screen. And I had an initial conversation with Harry actually the other day about this.
Yeah, it's a tight number. 35 is a tight number. We'll certainly get there for sure.
Right.
So I want to make sure that this board is aware and that we understand we have to keep an eye on that. Commissioner Powell, I see you raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. With regard to substitute teachers, I believe there's an active audit going on of that process. If you could write out your questions or the theory of where the loopholes are, so that I can take that to our Auditor General and ask her to incorporate that in their report. And once that's part of their investigation, the administration has to respond to the report that ends that investigation. So as far as substitute teachers, that's my suggestion. Regarding a more global FTE reconciliation, that's an interesting proposal, and I like it. I can see a couple of places where payroll could exceed our budget. Number one that comes to mind is students getting assigned to special ed classrooms, where we have to do it, but there's not a clear process by which the school board learns that translates into a need to hire a new special ed teacher or an additional para, to support a classroom or anything along those lines. And based on student mobility during the course of the year, we're constantly asking for a true up, usually around bedstay, because presumably that's when students stop moving, but that's just simply not the facts, right? Students move throughout the whole course of the whole year. And at what point are classrooms falling within or below a reasonable threshold? At what point does a classroom start out with 22 first graders and end up with 11? And do we as a board accept that outcome without demanding that classrooms be merged or some other solution, because that's wasting teachers' capabilities, right? If they're capable of giving instruction to 22 kids and they've only got 11 in front of them, that's not very efficient. So the idea of a reconciliation is intriguing, but I kind of hope that it be very closely focused so that it doesn't tie up an exhaustive amount of staff time.
Just for clarification, the reconciliation request was around the charters piece, and then the report for human resources and budget and finance. Let me be clear, 35 is the number to watch closely for FTEs this year for this board. And so everything you just said, if students move, they need staff. We cannot hire beyond the 35 number. Like, I just want to be clear. So, and human resources has an obligation to talk with finance. I understand that there might be a need, but if there's no money, they are going to have to work together with the administration. Both departments are going to have to figure this out together. What's happened in the past is that one department recognizes that there's a need and they'll take the lead to hire and fill the position, and then tell finance that they've went ahead and did this, and finance now has to figure out where the money's coming from. And what I'm saying is we barely passed a balanced budget. We don't have it. And so I want to be very clear again on, I want 35 to be stuck in all of our heads, that 35 FTEs is the magic number this year. And we have to monitor and watch that, because we don't understand what process is in place to control that piece. And until there's some better controls in place, this is what I'm requesting. President White?
Okay, I just, well, I wanted to comment. Well, actually, I'll save my comments for new business. I don't know that they're particularly relevant for what you're talking about now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Anybody else on these topics? I know I lumped the charter school reconciliation reports, but that was part of the conversations with the auditor's findings. What I will add, Dr. Jallo, I see your hand up, and give me 1 second. I just want to add that we all received the email from the auditor with their letters and of findings and their information. And so if you haven't had a chance to review that, this is where these conversations are being driven from, you guys. Dr. Jallo?
Yeah, I'm gonna come back and sound like a broken record. So I want us to be clear about what you're asking. You are asking for a plan for how HR and finance are gonna work together to make sure that each position maybe has a budget code or assigned to the position, so that you can always see how we're doing in terms of, does each position that is being asked for has a funding code towards it, so you know that the money exists for said position.
Exactly, and quarterly.
And you want that quarterly.
Mm-hmm. And it can start, so quarterly after July 1, I'll look at the calendar, but quarterly 4 times a year after July 1, which is when our budget year starts. So the first one would not be due to July, August, September, October.
Okay. And then the other, I'm sorry, the other request.
Go ahead, sorry.
The other request, can you just repeat exactly what?
So the other request and the reconciliation, that one for the charter schools. Mm-hmm. So the auditors, when I met with them, mentioned that we do those every other month, and that there's no audits around those numbers. So we just accept that, you know, a school can say, I have 100 students, and we just say, okay, there's no actual auditing to ensure that the numbers actually match and that we should be paying them what we're paying them.
Are you suggesting that administration audit?
I'm suggesting that we have a general auditor, that should be
that person. Okay.
Yeah. And again, based on the state auditor's findings and their final letter submission to all of us.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Shepard?
I'm sorry, Commissioner LeBron. Yes. On that report from the Auditor General, is there a timeline that you want that to happen? Do you want that to be quarterly? Are you looking at that being annually?
Reconciliation reports are done every other month. They happen 6 times a year. And that's how we end up paying out what we pay to each of the charters when they submit their enrollment numbers and bills. And what the auditors mentioned is that they've never been audited. We just assume that they're giving us, by face value, the information is correct.
And I just confirm you want to see those before charter schools get paid?
Yes.
Because that's important. Doesn't make sense to read it after you pay.
May I say, my understanding of the charter school legislation is that they get paid up front the beginning of the year, so we can't hold up payment, but it's or at least we can't hold up initial payment, but we could hold them accountable in subsequent payments.
So let me just say, they're paid July 1 because their budget year starts too. And so it's based on whatever estimates that they've given us for enrollment. But then every other month after that, there is a reconciliation report that either addresses increases or decreases. And for example, we passed a budget with an estimate of enrollment for this upcoming year. But then we also had 3 hearings after we passed the budget to increase these charter schools enrollments. I just want to put it out there. So that can have an impact on our budget too. We won't know unless we know. But what the auditors from the state mentioned was that these reports have not been audited at all. Like, that's an area we should be concerned about and flagged and make sure. And I don't know if this has to be a practice from here on out. I'm just saying for this fiscal year, we absolutely should be auditing those. And those happen every other month.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Can I suggest that you also pay particular attention to auditing the numbers of the special ed students in the charter schools and the monies you're paying for that?
I'm going to write that down too.
I got it.
Oh, thank you, Marisol. Commissioner Shepard.
This is more so directed towards Dr. Myers-Miles. I know we keep talking about reports, all of these things being added, doing it quarterly, and I'm not sure that I would frame them as all these plans, because then we have to read 5 million plans. What I would though say is that where there is room to make them superintendent regulations, I think would be much, much easier to follow instead of just the format of them and just everything. I just think it would be easier to do them as superintendent regs. That way you just put it in place, keep it moving, and then people know, people can go back and have a reference point. Because I do think that all these things are important. Just saying that their plans though and coming quarterly, it's a lot. So I think the easier route is to put them in superintendent regs.
Can I just follow up and ask, I don't know if you know this, Commissioner Shepard or legal, for a superintendent regulation, does there need to be a school board policy or a resolution from us? Because I thought the superintendent regulations were driven through school board policies. Or, I don't know, I'm just asking for clarity. I really don't. I see Carl's on the line.
The superintendent can certainly promulgate a regulation to direct her staff. Oftentimes, however, I've observed in the past, we've had board policies that have requested regulations for their implementation that frankly weren't drafted. That's not a good thing.
Okay, yeah, I know. Okay, that's why I was confused, but thank you for that clarification.
And I was gonna say, I know in the past we've had conversations around a superintendent reg standing alone with no policy that oversaw it. So just so you know, it did go both ways.
Okay, thank you both. President White and then Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, going to Dr. Jallo's theme of making sure we know what comes out of this particular meeting. It's not clear to me what happens next. For example, these ideas could be taken up in the audit committee, because as you all know, I don't know if you know Dr. Jallo, our Auditor General has an audit plan. This is probably not in that audit plan. This could also obviously come under the umbrella of our finance committee. So the question becomes, what happens next? Do we continue to talk about this in audit and or finance? The other thing is the division of responsibilities. If this is something that, obviously this is something that a finance chair, Commissioner LeBron, could ask for and get. This is something that Commissioner Powell, who is chair of audit, could get. But I think there does need to, again, to your point, Dr. Jallo, making sure conversations end with understanding where the finish line is. It's not clear to me where that is. I think these are good inquiries, but does Dr. Myers do this work or have her staff do this work, or does Anissa Henry Wheeler do this work? I don't know that we can resolve that tonight. I'm not proposing.
No, I would like to resolve that tonight, because I thought we were clear, or I have a little bit clear understanding, and folks can jump in if they don't. The human resources and the finance quarterly report, that is going to lie here under finance. because we're watching those numbers and those FTEs and ensuring that the budget is staying balanced. So that's one. The auditing of the reconciliation report, again, that was the state's recommendation. That can lay in either one, but it should be done. I personally don't have a preference if it comes to finance, which it could, because we're really looking at how much we're spending there and if it's lining up with what they're saying versus what we're paying out. Or it could be an audit report that goes through audit. For that, I don't care, but I will not forget. So let me just say that I've made these requests, including that Dr. Jallo also mentioned we should be looking at those special ed numbers that are coming through those reports as well. So that's one. And Van, the timeline for that human resources and finance FTE report was that it would be quarterly based on the new budget year, which is July 1. And in 4 months from now, which is in October, that's when we would see the first report. And then taking into account Commissioner Shepard's recommendation of asking Dr. Myers to consider putting it as a regulation, then it would be written that it would be quarterly starting July 1.
Well, before you cut me off, I didn't have a chance to finish what I was saying. And that was that for me, I just did not see the clarity. I'm picking up on Dr. Jallo's clues or comments that every conversation should not just end with clarity for one person or two people, for the entire board. Where are we going with this? I heard a lot of good ideas, but it wasn't definitively clear where this stuff was going to land. Was it going to land in the audit committee, or was it going to land in finance? And if so, chairs of finance and chairs of audit aren't going to be doing the work. And wasn't clear to me, just to me, Commissioner Brown, just let me finish. Wasn't clear to me. I know there's clarity to you, but wasn't clear to me is who was actually going to be doing the work. I did hear our clerk ask a specific question in response to your demand as chair. I forgot what the question was, and I think you answered it. But for me, I wanted to make sure that when this portion of the meeting ends, there was clarity about how this work was going to be divided and who actually was going to be doing the work. Again, I understand it seems to be clear to you, but I think the whole board has to understand what is going to be happening and who's going to be doing the what.
The board hasn't asked questions except you, but let me just also mention this. There should be no clarity that we have an internal auditor who is paid to be the internal auditor, and when I specifically say something should be audited, there should be no misunderstandings as to who should be doing the auditing. So I just want to put that out there. We pay an internal auditor, and that is a function that they should be doing. I just want to put that out there.
Is it my turn?
Yes, Commissioner Powell.
Okay, so I'm going to respectfully disagree with what you just said, but I got to frame it with something that Commissioner Shepard raised. She pointed to superintendent's regulations versus policy. There's a third book. There's another book besides our policy manual. It's either called a finance practices and procedures or business practices and procedures that in fact the business office should be turning to determine whether a bill should be paid. And I should think that if the business office hasn't been reviewing that reconciliation statement prior to cutting its next check, that's where the falling down happened, that it should be in the finance, the purview of the finance office. And I say that because we have a claims audit function. It's been laid out and defined by the law, and that's why we have, specific individuals or soon to be outsourced doing claims audit. This is an audit of the same sort, but one that is not governed by the Hevesy law. So I would ask Bob to weigh in whether or not this is something that that your department should be exploring adding to your responsibilities. And I say that because we ought to, I mean, the current auditor, we should have a conversation about whether the auditor, whether the charter school claims are part of our, we should be doing a risk assessment about whether we're over or underpaying and whether that should be an audit. But audits are typically done in a kind of a rotating fashion. You don't do it every time unless you're claims auditor. An audit is driven by your risk assessment. And if you want an audit of a document done every single time, it has to be built into your business practices. And I'd like for Bob to weigh in on that.
Bob.
Thank you, Commissioner. As Commissioner LeBron stated earlier, we do make estimated payments to the charter schools 6 times a year based on updated enrollments. Finance does work with our accountability office to verify the enrollment counts at the charter schools. I don't want to put any words in the Department of Accountability's mouth. I'm not 100% sure what the verification process is or data verification process is, but we do work with accountability on that, and then a reconciliation is prepared generally in August after year end to true up all the dollar amounts that are paid to charter schools. In terms of an audit function, Commissioner Powell is correct. You audit on a periodic basis, but certainly whatever verification is requested of the board, I have no doubt finance and accountability could work together to produce something to your satisfaction.
Yeah, so let me just also say, this is not my opinion, and so I don't care personally what some of my colleagues may believe is happening or not happening. This was in the state auditor's final letter to this district. This was an area that we need to be mindful of and paying attention to. And they were very clear that we have not audited those numbers, but that we should be looking at those reconciliation calculations and making sure that those are being audited. And if this board is saying, and Commissioner Powell, if you're saying that our auditors claims people were the people, I don't even want to get into the dysfunction of that department not operating at best practices and at maximum level over the last 2 years.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, all I'm going to say is we have an internal auditor that we pay money to, and this should be a part of their job. Whether you believe that the audit should have a plan, there are plenty of times that our internal auditor has jumped in without moving away from the risk assessment audit plan that she had and completed a separate audit. I just want to put that out there plenty of times in the last 2 years. An example being one of the curriculum pieces that we asked her to audit on the fly, or when this deficit became public, then the focus went away from the actual risk assessment plan and lots of conversations around the deficit. So just want to put it out there. This is not my opinion, you guys. This is the state auditor's final findings and letter that was submitted to this entire board. But I wanted to put it out there for this community and on the record. Dr. Myers, did you have your hand up? Yes.
Did the board just want to hear a little bit, Dr. G. Martino's on about just the process as far as the accountability with charter schools, or no?
I don't. I just want, I brought it up because again, and I see Commissioner Malloy shaking her head. Yeah, so I will let him speak on it. But I just want to add again that this is all being driven from that final state auditor's findings and from the meeting that I had with them one-on-one. I don't know whose volume that is.
Dr. G. Martino will be brief. Just a quick overview.
Commissioner LeBron, as a matter of fact, that same office met with my team to request us walking them through the process. We have a series of built-in redundancies that are inclusive of crosswalking student registrant counts with our Office of Student Equity and Placement. We then track the same submissions in our student management system, and then back map the same registrants to the lists that are provided by the charter schools. In our auditing process, we actually discover on a weekly basis that students have returned to the district, and we actually put a stop on any information flow back to charters on those students, so they do not receive funding or reimbursement for the same students. As a matter of fact, we had prior to March 13th, we also, I personally addressed 3 students from charters who were the charters submitted for billing and reimbursability, and they threatened legal action if we did not reimburse for the said students. I conveyed to them and was very clear and provided explicit detail and registrant verification that the students had returned to the Rochester City School District. As a result, I refused to sign off on any reimbursement or payment. So that was dead in the water. So we do have a series of built-in redundancies that provides our district an assurance that we are not going to pay for students who are not in charters. Again, I met with the same team. They asked if they could audit our process and asked me how they could audit our process. So the answer is yes, and we can do so.
Great, thank you for all that. Again, I just want to remind folks, it was part of the final recommendations and in their letters. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm just sharing that this was all shared with the board. Some of us had the opportunity to meet with them one-on-one to ask additional questions and get additional clarification. And I wrote down my notes, and that was one of the notes that I wrote down. So I just want to put that out there. This is not my opinion. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm just saying that they recommended this, but that it also ties back to how we budgeted charters and really monitoring that line item in our budget.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell and President White. You're muted.
You're muted, Willow.
Sorry, thank you. First, let me say I am not questioning the facts of the audit, the comptroller's audit. I am not questioning that as fact at all. The question is, was the comptroller, first of all, was the comptroller correct that we are not auditing? And what Ray said suggests that we are auditing, and that the real question is, are we auditing every reconciliation? I would like Ray to answer that. And if so, then the process is already in place. And what we need to do then is answer to the comptroller's report in writing what that process is, because apparently they went through their entire audit and this didn't surface for them. I am happy to have a conversation with our Auditor General about what role she should play in this, but I would like to engage her in that. And I'm not sure that she's on this call, and I'm not sure it would be appropriate for her to engage at this precise moment in time. Ray, can you tell us once again, do you audit every report?
So, Commissioner, what we do is we actually audit every student that recrosses our desk. The reason we do that, so in essence, the answer is yes. The reason we do that is because what we found when I transitioned into the Office of Accountability was that there were students that had, that there were charters that had reissued registrants back to the district. And even though the district had the students in our seats, back in our seats, they were seeking a level of reimbursability. Further to your question, what we also found was that there were charters who were seeking to bill the Rochester City School District to the extent that they were issuing students and submitting student names that were not City of Rochester residents. I addressed one of such registrants actually in February, where the parents had joint custody. The student is a resident actually of Brighton. Brighton requested that we pay the charter, and I overtly refused, put it in writing. And the reason being was that the child, the father, who is a resident of Brighton, had primary, not sole, but primary custody to the extent that the child lived the majority of the time with the father in Brighton. As a result, we rejected that. They, quite frankly, were rather upset, but we still did not pay that, and they eventually backed off. I hope that answers your question and then some.
Commissioner Powell, did it answer your question?
If the short answer is that you audit every report every time, then yes, my question is answered. The next steps question then is, do we need to feed this information back to the comptroller by way of an answer to the audit?
If I may, the comptroller's office had requested, obviously our auditing processes, there are audits and there are reviews. In some cases, we review student records that come in. In other cases, we audit student records that come in. Audit, as you know, is a more formalized process. Commissioner LeBron, Chair LeBron is shaking her head because she—
because that's two different things happening. But go ahead, Ray, I'm gonna let you.
the level, she understands the level of distinguishability. As such, with the audits, the one thing that that the Office of the not the Attorney General, I'm sorry, the Comptroller, thank you, Mr. President. Comptroller's office had requested was whether or not we use one of their processes. We don't use one of their processes. We can adapt, and quite frankly, we can adopt and adapt one of their processes. I'm very familiar with their processes. I've actually been through a series of trainings with the New York State Comptroller's office and can do so. But as you know, there are certain aspects of the auditing process that apply in certain contexts. So we've really made this our own quite deliberately, because if we only used their process from a systems standpoint, we wouldn't catch some of the other pieces that some school districts or that some charters are trying to slip in. So again, our built-in redundancy is such that although it's not the standardized process that they use, we can adopt and adapt. Again, I would rather adapt by virtue of the fact that we tend to catch more with our process than we would otherwise.
Okay. Thank you. You know, again, everyone had an opportunity to read what they wrote. I have to go based on my experience right now. My trust is with the Comptroller's office, just based on 2.5 years in this district and understanding that one time we were told one thing and then another thing was occurring. So nothing against you, Ray, or anyone in the district. I'm just throwing it out there that this foundation has been laid out for me based on these experiences. So I have to go with what they say, but I'll leave it at that. And President White, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we have two very competent, capable chairs, audit and finance. Seems like there's some controversy, maybe it's too strong of a word, about what is actually happening. No offense, Ray, no offense, Commissioner LeBron, but the issue doesn't appear to be settled. So we have two very good chairs. One is audit, one is finance, Commissioner Powell, Commissioner LeBron. I think you two ought to confer, and I think you ought to talk offline. We're not going to get this resolved today. And then obviously Dr. Myers has to be a part of that conversation. And after that, I think what happens is one of two things happen, or maybe two things happen simultaneously. A letter goes out to the comptroller's office. This is not unusual for a Board of Education to respond to something. In fact, it's quite typical to respond to something that the comptrollers put into a report. These folks, by the way, and I know Commissioner LeBron knows this, and Dr. Myers, you probably know this as well. These folks from the local office are extremely cooperative, very supportive of this district, I think. I don't think their intent is to do any harm. They actually want us to do well. I picked that up in my conversations with them. So I just think we revisit the conversation, since there's apparently some dispute about it. And after writing the letter, or in addition to writing the letter, maybe we change our process. But I don't think right now, given what Dr. Giamartino said, and I think what our internal auditor has said to me, that she has some questions about whether that portion of the report is accurate or not. Again, no one trying to purposely belittle this district. Again, I can tell you, and I know Commissioner LeBron will tell you, these folks have been nothing but supportive, and that was actually going to be my next comment. But I would suggest that Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner Powell, you have an offline conversation about this.
Let me just be real clear. Hold on, I know, Van, but let me just be clear. That's not going to happen, and this is specifically why I, from the very beginning, said Commissioner Shepard should have been the chair of audit. I have no intentions to meet with some of my board colleagues for any reason ever outside of my required time in a board meeting. So let me just put that out there. So this conversation she can take this piece of it over as the chair of audit and work with the internal auditor and review the comptroller's office final letter, and they can make the decision on what to present back to the board, because our internal auditor does not just report to one commissioner. So I want to be clear about that too.
No, I understand.
Very clear and direct, so you understand where I'm coming from, and there's no confusion to you or any other board member at this meeting.
Well, one of the ways that we are clear and direct is we listen to each other. We let each other finish first. But be that as it may, I'm just going to tell you, I think that's regrettable. We were hired by the citizens of this community to work as a team. Some of us don't have personal relationships, and sometimes things can be very averse and difficult, but the expectation is we're to work together as a team. The Board of Education voted on who the chairs would be and who would be on each committee. That's
you guys voted.
Commissioner
you guys
LeBron,
have the board majority.
Commissioner
you guys
LeBron,
have the board majority, and you put the person who messed up the finance piece of it as chair of audit.
Commissioner LeBron, that's not only not fair, that's not appropriate.
Let's name names. You, Willa,
Commissioner LeBron,
Amy, and
Commissioner
Cynthia
LeBron,
voted for her to be the chair. Not
Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner LeBron,
not Natalie. So
that is not fair, and it's not appropriate to say that. But in any event,
it's what happened.
We vote as a body to do things. We can't vote individually. And when we vote as a group, our own code of ethics said that we move as a group. This group elected chairs. You are the chair of finance. That should be respected. Commissioner Powell is the chair of audit. That should be respected. And the idea is that people are to work together. Now, I can't, obviously, no one can force you to do what you don't want to do, but I got to tell you, it's regrettable, because this is an issue which you have raised, which is a legitimate one, which Commissioner Powell has some concerns about, which are one of our staff at central office is providing some correction and indicating that they are. So this has to be resolved. But if you don't want to be part of the proposed solution, there's nothing anybody can force you to do about that. But so just let me.
It's your proposed solution, and no, I will not be working with Commissioner Powell outside of my required board committee and board meeting time. Not doing it.
It's a matter of construction of what you're required to do, Commissioner LeBron. We're required to work together for the benefit of the students. But in any event,
right here in these meetings, in the committee meetings and in the board meetings, I'm not required to, on my personal time, take time to meet with Commissioner Powell. She's the one that has an issue with what the comptroller's letter said to us. And you had a meeting with them. They gave you the same information they gave me. So I'm just putting it out there. I just want it on the record. So you as the board president, you can work that out with her, but I'm not meeting with her.
Well, that's clear. So it doesn't make much sense for me to beat that proverbial horse. We have to move on. So to my earlier comments, then I'll adapt them so that Commissioner Powell, you will work with Dr. Myers on trying to formulate some factual understanding as to what happened here. And if necessary, you know, as is often the case, the board will provide a response, or the superintendent will provide a response. And if it means that they are actually right on this subject, then we may have to change our protocols and our processes.
Okay.
But again, given the lack of clarity, that's what we'll do to move forward. Thank you, Commissioner Powell.
Okay, you mean Commissioner LeBron, because I'm still chairing the meeting.
No, I was referring to Commissioner Powell because she's willing to do the work.
Do the work, Van.
I said I thanked her because she is willing to do that work.
Doing the work, and this is where we've landed. Please, just wrap it up. I don't know whose phone number keeps unmuting, but whoever is calling in and driving, we can hear the background noise. I do keep trying to mute it. But if nobody else has anything left to do, I don't think we have to go into executive session tonight.
You can hand the gavel back to me.
I'm sorry. This is Commissioner Shepard. I'm in the car.
Oh, Commissioner Shepard, yes.
I had to switch over to my phone, so this is me. But I did want to say that I am wondering if this is a matter of the processes not being in writing, and if there is an opportunity to adapt where it may. Is that I know a huge part of some of the times where there is confusion is because things haven't been in writing and people are just doing it because they naturally do it and they know that's what they're supposed to do. But then when outside eyes come in, they can't verify, and sometimes it switches based on who was working that day, you know. And so if it's a matter of it not being in writing, this is again, and I'm not loading this on Dr. Myers Small, but I do think that our policy book and superintendent regs and even the document that Commissioner Powell talked about, that all of these things should be in writing, and it takes one time to just put it in writing and keep it moving. So I did want to add that, and someone can put me back on mute because I don't know how to do that.
I'll put you on mute. Thank you. Mr. Adams, Commissioner Adams.
So, Lisa says she'll get the details and we'll resolve this.
Can you repeat that?
Said Anissa said that she will get the details and try to resolve this.
Thank you. It's our internal auditor. So if nobody has anything else, I'm gonna close out the finance meeting. I think I need
motion?
Yes, do I need a motion to end finance officially? So you motioning, Commissioner Adams?
Motion.
Seconded.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. It's 8:13 p.m. for our staff, and the finance meeting's officially over. I'm going to turn the gavel over to President White.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. What we have left on our agenda is a new business, and then it appears we do have to go into executive session. But on new business, I did indicate that I did want to say something about the comptroller's report that has nothing to do with what we just finished discussing, which I think was important. I want to quote the comptroller's letter because, you know, the media always puts out reports about what the board did and what the board did not do. And I found it probably not surprising that this letter from them dated June the 5th got no coverage whatsoever. Now, there were some challenges. They did say there's some work that we need to do, but it was clear that they stated that we had made some improvements, and I quote, and I was hoping to find this in the newspaper, Justin, or in Channel 10, 13, because they're always reporting what these people are saying about us. But this letter, this sentence was conspicuously missing. They said, "We commend the superintendent and the Board of Education for the actions they have taken to improve accuracy of the budget projections in the 2021 budget and advance the district's overall financial condition." You know, if that had said something just the reverse, it had been headline news. But Justin, all you folks out there in the media, where is that headline? Where is even the byline that we've made some progress? This is important, just as important as all the areas in which we still have to make improvement. And I will not be silent, and we should not be silent about areas in which we've made improvement. But we ought to be honest about who helped us make those improvements. Certainly, once again, on behalf of the board, because I know there will be no debate about it, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Anne Marie. Thanks to all the senior management team that stepped in and did something in the middle of a national crisis and a local crisis when our superintendent left without much notice. So, and thank you to my colleagues, because you remember, we had a superintendent saying, we could not deliver, the Board of Education, he could not deliver a budget with this Board of Education. And Linda and Bob and Anne Marie were able to do that with this Board of Education. So again, while we have a lot of work to do, we've accomplished a lot. And again, I hope the media sometimes picks up when we do things right as much as they pick up things when we do things wrong. All right, next item on the agenda is executive session. It's come to my attention that we have to have an executive session relating to some legal advice and also relating to a personnel matter, I believe. Can I get a motion from one of my colleagues to go into executive session? And then we're going to have
Commissioner Elliott needs to speak.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Vice President Elliott.
Yeah, let me just say, because I'm a little disturbed about us not working together. Let me say this. I remember when I was not attending some of those committee meetings, people changed the bylaws to make sure that I attended. And so it is important, whether we like each other or not, that we work with each other, because you all changed the policy on me. Because I did not have the background in finance, and I was not necessarily interested in being at those meetings. And now all of a sudden, you know, we don't want to work together. That's not fair. You changed the policy on me, but now you don't want to work. You know, we don't want to work with each other. Really? Come on now. We can't continue.
Let me just clarify that you're talking about the committees were changed, committee of the wholes, and I attend every meeting, and if I miss a meeting, it is for a legitimate reason.
Doesn't matter. All you need is 4 votes.
I come to all the meetings.
It doesn't matter whether you come or not.
Was for me to speak to Commissioner Powell on my own personal time, and I'm not doing it. None of you can.
I just see it as being somewhat unfair that we're not working together.
With someone outside of my personal time. I show up to all the meetings. I read all of the materials thoroughly, more than anybody on this board, and I do my part. I show up to all the meetings, board business meetings, committees of the whole, all of them, regardless if I support the subject or not, I show up. Now, what Van was asking me was to meet with her on my personal time. I'm not obligated to do that, and I will not do that.
It may not be an obligation, but it seemed to me there should be an ethical issue here that we.
Yeah, I definitely have an ethical issue. So let's throw it out there. I have an ethical issue being a person of color, being asked to meet with a racist on my personal time. But during these meetings, I have to.
Can I just step in?
There are a whole lot of racists around.
Hold on.
There is an ethical reason for me not to have to go and meet with a racist on my personal time.
Commissioner LeBron.
What I'm saying that I believe that we have to be fair. And I think that if we're doing the business of this board, that it is important that we, and I think that Van was making a recommendation. He wasn't requiring anybody to meet, but if we're going to move to a level where we are respected in this community, we've got to work together. We should not be allowing the press or the community to look at us as if we're not working together. We can't continue to do that. So on some levels, we have to put our pride aside, or whatever the case may be, and work together. I mean, this is why we got this monitor in here. It just seems to me that we don't get it. We still don't get it.
No, I get it. I get it. But none of what you're saying requires people to work on being an anti-racist, and they don't do that work. So no, Commissioner, I will come to every single meeting. I will do my part. I will read everything I'm required to read and then some, but I will not meet with commissioners who I don't respect, who I know don't respect me, certainly don't respect me as a woman of color, and use my personal time, which is very limited because I work and I have children. It is very limited to meet with Commissioner Powell. And we've had board retreats and she's been mum's the word when it comes up. When we start talking about racism, she is mum's the word, like she's not even a part of it. She ain't got nothing to say.
Commissioner LeBron, let us return to the stack here. I see Natalie Shepard, Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Vice President Elliott, that this board did not change the bylaws on you, that Commissioner Hallmark and the rest of the board talked about this multiple meetings that you were at, and we had all agreed on committee of the whole. I can't remember if you were at.
No. I know exactly what I'm saying.
But we did not change. No, but I'm telling you that that's not correct information.
And that's okay.
For the community.
You don't have to talk about it.
Well, I won't talk to you. I will talk to the community. That's not correct.
Yes,
and
it
is. If the sentiment that you're trying to convey is the fact that it was changed because we had commissioners that were constantly not coming to meetings and then asking the same question 5 million times because they missed meetings, that was the sentiment behind it. And I will say that. But they were not changed on you as if you were blindsided as to why we went to committee of the whole in the first place. And the reason why we're out of committee of the whole now is because if somebody by law in committee of the whole is going to say that this whole board needs to be there and people are still choosing not to come, then why does everybody else have to be subjected to following something like that when everybody is not doing it? We're not holding ourselves accountable as a board. And I just wanted to clarify that for the community because nothing was done in secret. You were a part of the committee of the whole meeting. And I'm telling you that, and I'm telling you, well, I'm not telling you anything. I'm talking to the community in regards to clarifying and nothing was done behind your back.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a stack. We have a stack. I see Commissioner Adams on the stack. Commissioner Adams.
So, y'all work with me because I got to be to work at a certain time, and I'm trying not to be late tonight. I really am, and we do have a little bit of agenda here. Can we just breathe and just keep it moving a little bit so I don't be as late work tonight?
That would be a
good idea. And I would just
idea.
end that we've got to do a better job of working together. That's what I would end with.
All right. That would be a calling of the question. So we are going to move on to the next item on the agenda. And that was, I was looking for a motion to go into executive session to discuss a matter related to legal advice. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Is there a second to that motion?
Seconded.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. All those in favor of going into executive session indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not likely that we will, we have to have a professional development session. Is that being done in open session? Carl? Marisol? Hello.
I was hoping that we would do it in a retreat session because it's
retreat
really
session. Okay, so all right. So thank you, Carl. I asked that question because I wanted to let folks know whether we would be coming back into open session. We will not be coming back into open session. We'll get some advice from our attorney, maybe hear some personnel matters, and then we will be going into a retreat to get some professional development relating to how we can perform better as board members. So on that note, I would say good night to you all on behalf of the board. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you the next time at our next board meeting. Good night.